The other piece here that I think is critical from an inclusion perspective is understanding the intersections. And so I mentioned earlier the importance of intersectionality. Are we all familiar with intersectionality? Okay, so this is a critical piece. And so many of you, your organizations have been doing diversity and inclusion work for years now. How many of you would say you have D&I programming? Yeah. So as we push the envelope now in our diversity and inclusion programming, what we see is this. A lot of the programming we've had in place over the last several decades hasn't worked because we continue to be in a place where despite the emerging leader pipelines being extremely diverse, we're not seeing the diversity reflected in the senior leadership ranks. And so as we push the envelope and we start getting more into the meat and nuances around behavioral change, we start bringing in discussions like intersectionality. When I'm talking about intersectionality, what I'm talking about is membership in a few cultural identities where the experiences overlap to have an outcome or an impact on how it is that you behave and how you are treated. And so, for example, and I was referring to this earlier when I was saying, to say that all millennials are X or Y or Z is, to me, far too broad a generalization, because when you take a look at some of the intersections or overlaps here, if you have someone who is a millennial and it overlaps, the person comes from a lower socioeconomic background, is a person of color whose parents immigrated or they immigrated from a minority religion, how they experience the workplace may be very different than someone who is multi-generational Canadian, comes from an urban upbringing, is white-skinned Christian, and comes from a middle class, or more importantly, an upper class background. So these intersections of identity can have a profound impact on how it is that a millennial will behave, and we cannot, in our inclusion discussions or leadership discussions, we would be remiss not to focus on intersections in our millennial discussion. And my hope is after today that this is a lens that you will start to apply in your discussions. This is where intersections come into play. Because I'm going to throw out there that what my experience has shown me working with a range of Canadian corporations and American corporations in particular is this. That while in a traditional Canadian or American corporate model, some millennials will challenge or want more autonomy and want the desire to be more unstructured. Those millennials, I'm going to argue strongly, come from the demographic of the dominant culture. So what am I saying? If you start to poke and prod organizations and start paying attention to my suggestion for you as a takeaway is start paying attention to what is the demographic, the diversity demographic of the millennials who are challenging the existing structure and are saying, I want more autonomy, I want more freedom, I want more flexible ways to work. And I'm going to throw out there that you're going to see patterns of homogeneity around who those millennials are. And then on the other side of the spectrum in managing millennials, what you're going to probably see, and I can tell you this because it's borne out in the work that we do with our clients, is that there are other millennials where there are patterns around who lives over here, where the feedback to these millennials is, you're not challenging enough, you're not speaking enough, you're not taking enough initiative, you're not being proactive enough, because the millennials that come from over here come from cultures where you do not challenge authority and you do not challenge structure. And in fact, if you take a look at Canada's demographic, the most populous ethnocultural communities within the millennial base, outside of white Canadians, come from the Aboriginal community, because the Aboriginal community makes up about 5% of Canada's population, the South Asian community, Mapeeps, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, East Asians, Chinese community in particular, at about 4.5%. These groups culturally are taught to be very deferential to positions of power and authority, to not challenge authority, to be very group focused and be very high hierarchy. And so when I look at the feedback within a lot of our corporate clients around the messaging over here with this demographic, it's the challenge structure, be more authoritative, speak in meetings, be more extroverted. And then the feedback over here where you're challenging too much, there is more of that dominant cultural homogeneity. So I raise this because minimization is having a positive impact on some groups dinging some who challenge too much, but then is leaving behind other cross-sections. And I just mentioned ethnoculture. We could do this, have the same dialogue around gender and intersection, and if I were to really push the envelope further with you, we could get into the intersection between age, gender, and ethnoculture. Because I'm going to throw out there that all millennial women do not speak with one voice. If you overlap in race and ethnocultural backgrounds, women of color, and even within women of color, the experiences are very different.